Montana Territory. Late summer of 1874, the sun hung low like a blood-orange coin over the Bitterroot Mountains when Yates Callahan saw the smoke curling up from the hills. He reined in his chestnut gelding, narrowing his eyes. That much smoke meant trouble, maybe a homestead fire, maybe worse. He adjusted his saddle rifle and nudged the horse forward, his jaw tight. By the time he crested the ridge, the cabin below was half burned, the barn a black skeleton. He saw two bodies near the porch, men, likely ranch hands, maybe family. The grass was trampled with hoof prints headed east. Bandits, the kind that hit fast and left ruin. Yates rode down slow, careful not to spook whoever or whatever was left. A small movement beside the burned barn caught his eye. He dismounted, rifle ready, and stepped through the smoke. She sat on the ground, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. Her long dark hair was matted with ash, her dress torn, blood dried along her temple. Her face was streaked with soot, but her eyes were sharp, alive, haunted. "Ma'am," Yates kept his voice low. "Are you hurt?" She flinched, then looked up at him, blinking like she was dragging herself back into the moment. "They're gone," she whispered. "They took my sister." Yates crouched beside her. "What's your name?" "Naomi Kessler," she said, her voice shaking. "They came at dawn, said we had gold." "We didn't. My little sister Nora, she's only 15. I tried to fight them. They hit me. I do not remember anything after that." Yates looked down at her hands, bloodied knuckles. She had not gone down easy. How many were there? 5. Maybe 6. One of them had a scar across his neck. "Their horses had a broken shoe print front right. I saw it when they dragged her away." Yates nodded once. She was sharp, even through the shock. He looked toward the eastern trail. "They have a few hours on us, but they will not be riding too fast with a girl in tow." Naomi stood on shaky legs. "I am going with you," he raised a brow. "You are in no shape to ride." "I am not letting you go alone. She is all I have." There was steel in her voice past the fear. Yates hesitated, then gave a short nod. "All right, but you ride my horse." "I will take the pack mule." They buried the dead quick and silent. Yates gave her his canteen and a clean shirt from his saddlebag, which she slipped on over her torn dress. She moved stiffly but with purpose. By sunset, they were on the trail east. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of hooves the only sound between them. Naomi's grip on the reins was tight, her eyes fixed ahead. "You from around here?" Yates asked after a while. "No, we came up from Kansas last year, tried to start fresh." Her voice wavered. "We had nothing but each other, not anymore." Yates looked away. He had known loss too, his older brother killed at Cold Harbor, his folks gone to fever the year after. He had been drifting ever since. Ranch work, cattle drives, trail guiding, never stayed long in one place, never let anyone close. "Until now, we will get her back," he said quietly. Naomi turned to look at him, her eyes glinting in the fading light. "Why are you helping me?" "Because someone should." They camped that night near a stream, fire low, stars scattered above like silver dust. Naomi sat wrapped in a blanket, staring into the flames. Yates brewed coffee, strong and bitter, and handed her a tin cup. She took it, fingers brushing his. "Thank you," he nodded, settling beside her. "You remember anything else about them?" One had a broken tooth. Another wore a Union coat, though he was no soldier. Their leader was the one with the neck scar. He did not speak much, just pointed. Yates memorized every detail. He had known men like that, drifters turned robbers feeding off the weak. "You ever shoot a gun?" he asked. She looked at him. "I can load and aim, not much else." "That is enough. I will teach you the rest as we go." They rode at first light. The trail was easy to follow, broken brush, hoof prints, a dropped kerchief with a faded blue flower. By noon, they found a burned-out camp, ashes still warm. "They are close," Naomi whispered. Yates scanned the trees. "We will ride another hour, then circle around. If we catch them unaware, we stand a chance." "What happens if they see us first?" Yates met her eyes. "Then I shoot first." They rode hard, cutting through pine and dust. Just before dusk, they found them 5 men around a campfire in a dry ravine. One girl tied and gagged near a log. Nora. Her hair was tangled, face bruised, but she was alive. Naomi covered her mouth, tears springing. Yates put a hand on her arm. "We wait until dark," she nodded. They crept down when the fire burned low and the bandits were heavy with drink. Yates took the one on watch first, knife silent against his throat. Then two more, quick shots muffled by distance. Naomi moved like a ghost, reaching her sister and cutting the ropes with shaking hands. One of the men stirred, blinking in confusion. Yates raised his rifle, but Naomi stepped forward, picked up the fallen pistol, and fired. The man dropped, silence. "Then Nora," she sobbed. The girl clung to her, sobbing into her sister's shoulder. Yates stood still, breathing hard. Then Naomi looked at him, eyes wide with shock. "I shot him," she whispered. "You saved her," Yates said. They rode west under stars, the girls sharing the saddle, Yates walking beside them. They reached the burned homestead 2 days later. Naomi refused to look at the ruins. "We cannot stay here. You got kin anywhere?" "No, just us now." Yates looked at them, 2 girls with nothing left, and him just a cowboy who had never stayed anywhere long enough to belong, but this felt different. "You can come with me," he said. "I have land near Helena." "Small place, water runs clean, not much, but it is safe." Naomi stared at him. "Why?" "Because maybe I am tired of being alone." She looked down, then back up. Her hand found his. "I think I am too," and for the first time in years Yates smiled, not because he had to, but because something in him had shifted. Something real. They would ride north tomorrow. Together. The trail north curved alongside the Blackfoot River, its current fast and clear, throwing back the late summer light in quicksilver ribbons. Yates walked with the mules lead in hand, boots stirring up the dry dust, while Naomi rode ahead with Nora perched behind her, arms loosely wrapped around her sister's waist. The girl had barely spoken since they left the homestead. Her breaths came shallow and her eyes stayed on the horizon as though afraid anything closer might break her. "Water's good here," Yates said, pausing near a bend where willows grew thick. "Let's water the horses and rest a bit." Naomi dismounted first, legs stiff from the ride. "Nora," she said gently, "come stretch." The girl slid down without a word. She walked to the river's edge but didn't kneel to drink, just stood watching the current. Naomi glanced at Yates. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday morning." "She'll eat when she's ready," he said. "You should, though. You've been riding without breakfast." She opened the pack and pulled out the small cloth bundle of dried meat and cornmeal biscuits. She chewed slowly, standing beside him in the quiet. "You know what you'll do with that land near Helena?" she asked after a long stretch of silence. "Had plans to raise cattle," he said. "Started fencing the southern ridge before I rode out last week. There's good pasture if you keep the elk off it." "I've never lived anywhere long enough to plant anything," she said. "Don't have to plant it to belong to it," he said. "Sometimes showing up and staying is enough." She looked at him, her face unreadable. "You've stayed before." "No," he admitted, "but I've been thinking lately maybe it's time." They camped that night in a shallow grove, cottonwoods rustling above them like soft murmurs. Yates built the fire low and steady, and Naomi laid out the bedrolls without being asked. Nora curled up beneath her shawl and turned her face to the trees. Yates sat with his back to a trunk, cleaning his rifle in long, practiced movements. Naomi knelt beside the fire, feeding in dry twigs, her face lit gold by the flames. "I never thanked you," she said, eyes on the fire, "for risking your life, for bringing us back." "It wasn't a favor," he said. "It was the right thing." "Right things still come with a cost." His hands slowed. "I've paid worse." She looked over at him. "You lost someone," he hesitated, then nodded. "My brother, he was younger, reckless, thought he couldn't die." He paused. "He did." Naomi didn't speak for a while, then, "Nora used to follow me everywhere. When we were little, she'd crawl under the quilts when the wind got too loud. I used to pretend I didn't notice." "She'll find her way back," he said, "but not all at once." Naomi reached for a coal blackened pot and poured water for tea. "You're quiet most of the time." "Is that by choice?" "It's easier to listen that way." "Do you ever get tired of being alone?" He didn't answer right away. The fire cracked softly between them. "I think I stopped noticing after a while," he said. "But I notice now." The tea was bitter but warming. Naomi handed him a tin cup, their fingers brushing. She didn't pull away. "Do you ever wish your life had gone different?" she asked. "I used to," he said. "Now I think maybe it just hadn't started yet." They settled into sleep with the quiet ease of those who'd shared danger. Naomi lay between her sister and the fire. Yates kept watch through half the night, eyes scanning the darkness out of habit, rifle across his lap. The next morning, the wind changed. They reached the edge of a small logging camp by noon, where smoke rose from cook fires and the scent of pine sap clung to the air. Yates stopped just out of sight, tying the mule to a birch. "I know the foreman here," he said. "Name's Lyle Byers. He owes me a favor." Naomi adjusted her shawl. "Will he help if he's sober?" They walked in side by side, boots sinking into sawdust. A few men looked up from their benches, wary of the strangers. Yates found Lyle near the tool shed, shirt sleeves rolled and beard gone gray at the chin. "Well, I'll be," Lyle said, squinting. "Thought you'd gone down to Colorado this spring." "Changed plans," Yates said. "Need a wagon and some supplies and a quiet place for 2 girls to rest a day or 2. Lyle looked past him at Naomi and Nora. "Trouble handled," Yates said. Lyle gave a short nod. "Got a bunkhouse no one's using. Ain't fancy. Roof holds out the rain. That's enough." By late afternoon, Naomi had helped Nora into the bunkhouse and drawn the curtain across the narrow window. Yates stood outside, rubbing his palms together before stepping in. Naomi was tucking a blanket around her sister. She turned when she heard the door. "She's sleeping," she whispered. He nodded. "We can leave in the morning." She looked around the room, rough walls, 1 cot, a stool. "It's not much. It's safe," he said. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You're used to sleeping on the ground, aren't you? Most nights. I can't picture you behind a plow." "I'd rather mend fences than break soil." She studied him, quiet. "Are you always this steady, only when it counts?" Naomi stepped closer. The lantern light softened the bruises still healing on her face. "You said something the other night," she said, "about maybe it's time to stay." Yates met her eyes. "I meant it." She reached for his hand, fingers curling with quiet certainty. "Then maybe I'll learn how to stay too." Yates lifted her hand to his chest, holding it there like something sacred. "We'll learn together." Outside, the saws had gone silent. The camp was still, save for the wind in the trees. Inside, something had shifted again, not with noise or grand words, but with the quiet agreement of 2 people who'd been walking alone for too long. By the time they left the logging camp, the weather had begun to turn. Mornings carried a chill, and the clouds hung lower over the hills. Naomi pulled her shawl tighter as they rode, the wagon creaking behind them, filled with what little Lyle had managed to part with: flour, beans, a spare axe, and 3 good blankets. Nora rode beside the wagon on a borrowed pony, her back straighter than it had been days ago. She still didn't speak much, but her eyes no longer drifted like she was somewhere else. Yates noticed it first when she reached down to brush a fly off the pony's neck without flinching. The cabin came into view in the late afternoon. It sat low in the hills, framed by pines and backed against a shallow rise. The wood was weathered, but the roof held firm, and the small corral beside it was still intact. A single line of smoke curled from the chimney he'd left the flue open before he went south, in case he didn't come back. Naomi's eyes moved across the land slowly, as if mapping it. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. "This is yours?" she asked once they'd stopped near the porch. "Built it myself," Yates said. "Took 2 winters. Hauled the stone for the hearth out of the riverbed." She stepped down from the wagon and ran her fingers along the porch rail, quiet. "You've got spruce growing close enough for a woodshed," she said. "You ever split green wood in January?" "Once." "Learned my lesson." She looked over at him, and for the first time, a small smile touched her mouth, not born of relief or weariness, but something else. "I'll check the roofline," she said. "If we're staying, I want to know what we're sleeping under." He watched her walk the perimeter, noting the way she moved with purpose now. Her sleeves were rolled, and she'd pinned her hair up in a twist that left her neck bare to the wind. Inside, the cabin held the scent of dry wood and old tobacco. Yates lifted the trap door to the root cellar and found the potatoes still firm, the salted pork untouched. He opened the windows to air out the dust and set about clearing space. By nightfall, they'd swept the floors, patched the back window with oilskin, and stacked the last of the supplies by the hearth. Nora sat by the fire, shelling peas without being asked, her hands steady. Naomi moved past Yates as he stirred the stew pot, brushing a curl of hair from her cheek with the back of her wrist. "You said once you'd rather mend fences than break soil," she said. "But this place doesn't look like it came from mending." "I didn't say I didn't try the other," he said. "Just didn't take to it." She leaned against the hearth, arms folded. "You try a lot of things. Enough to know what I can carry." She tilted her head. "And what can you carry, Yates Callahan?" He met her gaze, steady. "A woman who's not afraid to speak her mind, a sister who needs a home. A life that starts quiet and stays honest." The fire popped between them. Naomi looked into the flames for a long moment before she spoke again. "My father used to say a good man doesn't wait to be asked to do right. He just does it." "I didn't come up with much besides a horse and a name," Yates said, "but I reckon I'd like to be that kind of man." She stepped closer, the space between them narrowing. "I'm not scared of work, Yates," she said, "or cold mornings or quiet years." Her voice softened. "But I've only ever seen love as something taken, not given." He reached for her hand, slow and sure. "Then let me show you different." Naomi's eyes searched his face, and something unspoken passed between them, something not made of words or promises, but of steady hands and the kind of silence that holds meaning. She didn't pull away. That night, after Nora had gone to bed and the stew was cooling in the pot, Naomi stepped out onto the porch. Yates joined her, the sky stretched above them in 1,000 stars, the air crisp with pine and the faint hum of crickets. She leaned against the post, arms crossed, watching the shadows stretch across the land. "I never thought I'd end up here," she said. "Neither did I," Yates said, "but I'm glad we did." He reached for her hand again, and this time she laced her fingers with his. They stood that way a long while, not speaking. And in the hush of the Montana night, with the cabin behind them and the land stretching ahead, the shape of their life began to form not in sudden declarations or sweeping gestures, but in the quiet certainty of two people who had come through fire and chosen to stay. The first frost set in by the second week of October, clinging to the grass at dawn and frosting the split rails of the corral. Yates rose early, as he always had, but now there was coffee waiting by the hearth, and the low creak of the floorboards told him Naomi was already up, too. She was outside when he stepped into the yard, sleeves rolled, her breath visible in the morning air. She was hauling water from the creek with a steady rhythm, her boots leaving clean prints in the frost-hardened earth. Yates took the pail from her hands without a word and carried it the rest of the way to the cabin. Inside, Nora was stitching patches onto one of the old quilts, her knees drawn up to brace the fabric. She glanced up, then returned to her thread. Naomi hung her coat on the peg beside the door. "She wants to learn to read better," she said. "She knows her letters, but not enough to get through a ledger." "I've got McGuffey's primer in the trunk," Yates said. "Used to teach my brother from it. You can take it if she wants." Naomi nodded, brushing her hands dry on her skirt. "She does. She's just not ready to say so yet. I'll pretend I left it out by accident." Later that day, Yates rode out to the north ridge to check the fence line where the elk had come through during the last windstorm. Naomi came with him, riding astride now, her skirts gathered for ease, a rifle slung across her back. Her seat was sure, her eyes alert. "This land," she said as they crested the ridge, "it's different than where I grew up. Back then, everything was flat and loud. You could see trouble coming for miles. Trouble here comes quieter," Yates said, "but it still comes." They rode along the edge where the boards had cracked. Yates dismounted and began removing the broken pieces. Naomi held them steady as he nailed in fresh rails. She didn't flinch when the hammer struck near her fingers. "You always build things to last?" she asked. Only when I know I'll be sticking around." She looked at him but said nothing. That evening, Naomi lit a taper and sat beside the hearth while Yates worked a whetstone along the blade of his skinning knife. Nora had gone to the loft early, eyes heavy from a day spent copying words from the primer onto scrap paper. Naomi reached for a bundle wrapped in brown cloth and unfolded it with care. Inside were a few torn pages, yellowed and fraying, the ink faded but legible. She laid one across her knees. "My mother kept these," she said. "They're hymns. She used to sing them when the nights turned cold." Yates set the knife aside. "Do you remember the tunes?" "Some of them." She hesitated, then began humming low. The melody was slow, mournful, but steady. Her voice didn't waver. He listened without speaking. When she finished, she folded the papers back into the cloth and smoothed the corners. "She died before we left Kansas," Naomi said. "Fever took her fast. I buried her with the rest of the hymns." Yates leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You never said much about before." "There wasn't much good in it. My pa couldn't hold work. He drank hard. We left too many places in the middle of the night. You carried Nora through all of it. She was the only thing I had that didn't leave." Yates looked at her hands where they rested on the cloth. "You've held everything together for a long time." She met his gaze. "I don't want to keep holding it alone." He reached across the space between them, slow and without pressure, palm open. She placed her hand in his and it fit there as if it had always belonged. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Naomi's fingers curled around his. "Then maybe I won't either." The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. Wind pressed gently against the cabin, but inside it was warm and the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of what they hadn't said yet, of what might still come. And for the first time in years, neither of them feared the morning. The first snow came at dusk, soft as down, laying quiet over the roof and the slope behind the barn. Naomi watched from the kitchen window while steam rose from the stew pot, and the scent of bay leaf and onion filled the cabin. She didn't speak, just stood with her arms folded, eyes tracking the flakes as they drifted down through the stillness. Yates came in from splitting kindling, boots wet and hair dusted white. He set the bundle near the hearth and unwound his scarf, eyes meeting hers across the room. "I saw elk tracks out by the west fence," he said, voice low from the cold. "Might be a heavy winter." She turned from the window and stirred the stew. "Let it come. We've got enough put up." He moved toward her, slow, brushing the snow from his shoulders. "You've taken to this place faster than I expected." "I've never had a reason to stay anywhere before," she said, without looking up. He set a hand on the back of the chair beside her. "You still waiting for it to fall apart?" "I used to, but not now." The stew bubbled between them. Naomi ladled it into bowls, careful not to spill, and handed one to him with both hands. He took it, fingers brushing hers. They ate in silence, Nora upstairs preparing for bed, the fire crackling low behind them. When the meal was done, Naomi stood and wiped her hands dry on the apron tied at her waist. She turned toward him, her eyes darker in the firelight. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said. Yates leaned back slightly, bowl in hand. "You afraid of it?" "No," she said. "But I want to do it right." He waited. "I want to marry you," she said, steady and without hesitation. "Not because I owe you and not just for Nora, but because I want to build this life with you, properly." He set his bowl down and came to his feet, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he reached into the chest beside the hearth and pulled out a small carved box. He opened it, revealing a ring of plain gold, smooth along the band. "I bought this in Helena last spring," he said. "Didn't know then who it was for, but I knew I'd know when the time came." Naomi stared at the ring, then at him. "You sure?" "I've never been more." She held out her hand, fingers still rough at the knuckles, and he slipped the ring on with care. It fit snug. Nora came down the ladder, rubbing at her eyes. She paused at the bottom step when she saw them. Naomi looked over. "We're getting married." The girl blinked, then came forward slowly, her voice small. "Will we stay here?" Yates met her gaze. "For as long as you want." Nora sat down on the edge of the hearth, quiet. Then I'd like that. They were married a week later in town at the small chapel near the Grange Hall. The minister kept his words brief but earnest. Naomi wore a deep green wool dress she'd sewn from fabric Lyle had sent up with the last supply wagon. Nora stood beside her, holding a winter bouquet of pine and dried lavender. Afterward, Yates took Naomi's hand as they walked back to the wagon. The wind stirred the hem of her dress, but she didn't shiver. "You nervous?" he asked, lifting her up beside him. "No," she said, lacing her arm through his. "I've never been more sure of anything." Back at the cabin, they built a fire in the bedroom stove and unpacked the last of the winter blankets. Naomi lit a single oil lamp and folded her hands in her lap while Yates unbuttoned his coat. "I keep thinking about all the places I've left behind," she said. "None of them were real, just stops." "This isn't a stop," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's a beginning." She stood and crossed to him, resting her hands at his collar. He touched her waist, grounding her. "I never wanted a grand life," she whispered. "Just a true one. You've got it." She leaned into him and he pressed his forehead to hers. "You don't have to carry everything anymore," he said. "I know," she breathed. They undressed slow and quiet, the lamp casting soft shadows across the timber walls. When they lay together, it wasn't with urgency but with reverence. Every touch was deliberate, every breath shared. She held his face as he moved above her, his hands steady on her hips, their bodies fitting like they had always been meant to, like this moment had been waiting for them all along. Afterward, she rested her head on his chest and listened to the rhythm of his heart. "I used to think I had to survive everything alone," she said. "You don't anymore," he said into her hair. They fell asleep warm beneath the quilts, the snow falling steady outside, sealing the world in quiet. In the spring, Naomi planted a garden behind the barn with Nora kneeling beside her, pressing seeds into the thawed earth. Yates rebuilt the chicken coop and added a second stall to the barn. The days grew longer and the sun climbed higher and the land bloomed. By summer, Naomi had learned to preserve peaches and mend harness leather. Yates taught Nora how to saddle her own horse and track mule deer. They rode to town once a month and always came back together. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields turned gold, Naomi stood on the porch, her hand resting on her widening belly. Yates came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him. "Do you think this child will love the mountains like we do?" "They won't know anything else," he said. She smiled, eyes full of the horizon. "Good." And with the wind brushing through the pine and the last light catching the roof of their home, they stood together, man, woman, sister, child soon to come, not just surviving but rooted, not just safe but whole. They had come through fire and silence and fear, and still they had chosen each other. Not for rescue or convenience but for love, for the life they would build, hand in hand, day by day, forever.